Hello, students. In our early lecture, we have studied the, the Romanticism, emergence of Romanticism in Germany and in France. And as we have seen, the French Romanticism and the features of the Romanticism propagated by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the renowned social thinker of the period, and his contribution to provide and expedite the intellectual inspiration and theoretical orientation of the French Romanticism. His major contribution is the concept of the Enlightenment. At the same time, the man's worth, the man's intelligence and caliber, the moral nature of his feelings, written to nature, as well as idea of the nature that are based on freedom from all methods of learning and education. So, the cultivation of feelings and emotions do contribute in making the literature as more liberal and moral. And we have seen the contribution made by the French romanticists like Rousseau, Madame de Stael, Victor Hugo, and Francois Chateaubriand in their religious, spiritual, and individualistic orientation and versification that utterly changed all these, say, the concepts of the Romanticism and features of Romanticism. He made a great impact with his plays and novels, and that these the revolutionary changes brought and paved the way towards the English Romanticism. The English writers and theorists come under the spell of this French Romanticism and inspired English Romanticism. English Romanticism started in the 18th century, mid 18th century, but the period that ended with the neoclassical era is 1773. We have seen this remarkable change with the death of neoclassical writer Alexander Pope. And now, by this time, the winds of the change or the transformation occurred in suppose 26 years, right from 1775 to with the publication of Lyrical Balance till 1800, roughly speaking, 1798 is the publication that marks the beginning of the English Romanticism. Like European counterparts, English Romantics were influenced by French Revolution that took place around this particular period or at the end of neoclassical period. It was replaced the neoclassical features of literary theories, faithful imitation of characters, objects, and reason were the major features that we see were replaced. And this opposition can be seen in both creative and critical writings. Wordsworth, who rejected the neoclassical rules for the poetry, he liked instead of urbane and urban type of writing, he brought the new fresh airs of the nature, the fresh and greenery with full of oxygen, refreshed his mind to write the poetry of the nature and with such a vigor and freshness. It was its publication with Lyrical Ballads. Preface to Lyrical Ballads substantiates his romantic theory, was primarily just an introduction to, but also a justification of the kind of poetry that he wished to write during his lifetime. He collaborated with S.T. Coleridge in composing the Lyrical Ballads. It stated, or the romantic concept of the poetry is very much effective, much more appreciative, and was welcomed by the fellow readers of the English literature and theorists. Apart from Wordsworth's preface, there were other major contributions that were made during this particular period in the Romanticism, were the contributions made by P.V. Shelley, John Keats, in their respective literary theories. John Keats, who never wrote such a kind of a treatise or essay, but his views on the Romanticism can be found in his letters written to various contemporary friends or the theorists. So, Keats's letters were excellent pieces of his criticism and theory. Keats did not wrote any kind of independent treatise, but he convincingly and elaborated his views on poetry. So, the critical statements that we see are theoretical and mostly developed. S.T. Coleridge, who wrote Biographia Literaria, his views on the critical concepts like reason, understanding of symbolism, allegory, how to achieve the organic and mechanical form, culture and civilization were the path breaking or critical theories. His major contribution can be seen when he classified the types of imagination. He categorized imagination into two categories: primary imagination and secondary imagination. At the same time, he compared primary and secondary imagination with fancy. So, the fancy and imagination is very much elaborated by S.T. Coleridge. Apart from Coleridge, Shelley, we have the critical bent of mind. But Shelley, who wrote the defense poetry in response to the charges leveled against poetry by his critic Thomas Love Peacock. He was an English satirist, and these features were again exceedingly and expounded by the Romantic theorists. The pre Romantic poets like Thomas Gray, Robert Burns, Oliver Goldsmith, they also contributed to the high Romanticism. And for the sake of convenience, English romanticists were categorized in two groups. Early group that we see Blake, Wordsworth, and Coleridge, and later group Shelley, Keats, and Byron. So it is important to know that these birds shared certain common goals like freeing poetry from the burdens of rules and artificiality. They contrasted the man-made world, championing freedom from all kinds of knowledge. In the early group of the English Romanticists, William Blake was the first prominent figure. Blake's Romanticism was different from the writers who were his contemporaries, as well as those who succeeded him. Blake regarded the poet as visionary and believed the poet's gift of imagination gave him prophetic powers. As a citizen of England, he was alert to the political developments and social ills of his time. As a sensitive artist, he believed that his major task was to harmonize the opposites and contradictions. His interest in arts like engraving and painting further deepened his artistic vision. His poetry was prophetic, religious, mythological, visionary, and was a blend of these ecstasy, visionary ecstasies. His poetry portrays the suffering and painful realities of his time. He offers compassion for the weak and exploited. He offers both a positive world in the songs of innocence and songs of experience. The Walter Scott is also who followed the historical novelist who followed the historical bent of mind, was a poet and novelist of the high romanticism. He was deeply influenced by nature, rural part of as well as Scottish legends and local heroic landscape. William Wordsworth, along with his friend St. Coleridge, was passionate and was called as a saint of the nature or the romanticism. He advocated the individual freedom, individuality, liberty. He followed the French Romanticist pillars of, as we call, democracy, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And that we see in his fellow writings. But this French Revolution or these changes, definitely he was frustrated, and that is what he's done from the radical ideas and idealism. But whatever he proposed a new theory in his anthology, Lyrical Balance, is a manifesto of English Romantic poetry. We see he emphasized the freedom of art and artist. He championed the real use of language, real life themes. A man speaking to men. He regarded poetry as springing from emotions recollected in tranquility. Stressed the qualities of emotional intensity, simplicity, spontaneity, love for nature, and bliss of solitude. S.T. Coleridge was a poet, a critic, and most influential figure of English Romanticism. Like Wordsworth, he was influenced by the promise of French Revolution, but later political developments has disillusioned him. Having disillusioned him, turn to intellectuals like Kant, Schelling for inspiration. He was very much under the spell of William Shakespeare and his dramatic art. But his metrical composition, his response to the works of science, give pleasure, not truth. According to him, poet is born. No factory can make a poet. The poet has magical powers that helps him to create the visionary poetry. Coleridge's own poetry possesses a dream-like quality where borders between dream and reality become blurred. He made a seminal contribution, at least two aspects, and that we see on his concept related to imagination. He distinguished very clearly fancy and imagination. He elaborated the types of imagination, primary imagination and secondary imagination, which is a rare gift to the poet and that gives delight to the reader. So, while explaining the creative role of imagination, he he valued the secondary imagination as poetic imagination. So, like these some of the romantic writers and theorists contributed to the English Romanticist. There were other fellow romantic writers and authors that we had to study more in English Romanticism. So these features and the theorist or the contributions made by theorists will be studied in our next coming lecture. Thank you.